A child's tears can change the fate of a kingdom faster than the roar of its strongest king. The streets of Blackstone City had fallen strangely quiet as the royal procession advanced beneath towering banners that shimmered in the cool autumn breeze. Merchants lowered their voices. Children stopped chasing one another between the market stalls. Even the restless horses seemed to sense the weight carried by the rider at the center of the column. Alpha King Kieran Ashford guided his midnight stallion through the broad stone avenue with the calm confidence of a ruler who had long grown accustomed to thousands of watchful eyes. His silver cloak drifted behind him like winter mist, and the polished wolf crest fastened across his chest reflected the afternoon sun in brief flashes of white light. People bowed as he passed. Some did so out of loyalty, others out of fear. Most simply understood that history often changed whenever the Alpha King appeared without warning among his people. Kieran acknowledged no cheers. His sharp gray eyes moved quietly across the crowd instead, studying faces rather than celebrations. A frightened expression hidden behind a smile had always interested him more than applause. Somewhere beyond the packed sidewalks, church bells marked the hour while the scent of fresh bread drifted through the cool air. For one fleeting moment, the city almost felt peaceful. Then everything changed. A tiny blur rushed out from between two frightened adults before anyone could react. Small boots slapped against the stone road as a little wolf pup, no older than 5, stumbled straight toward the king's horse. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Royal guards instinctively reached forward, but the child never looked at them. He threw both little arms around Kieran's boot, clinging to the Alpha King's leg with desperate strength, as though letting go would end his entire world. His shoulders shook with uncontrollable sobs. Dust streaked his worn clothes, and tears covered his pale cheeks. For several heartbeats, no one dared breathe. The Alpha King's stallion remained perfectly still, lowering its head as if it somehow understood the fear wrapped around the small child. Kieran slowly dismounted without saying a word. Instead of stepping away, he lowered himself until he was kneeling at the boy's eye level. His voice, when it finally came, was quiet enough that those closest had to lean forward just to hear it. "You're safe now." The child tried to answer, but another wave of crying stole his breath. Tiny fingers tightened around the king's cloak until the expensive fabric wrinkled beneath his shaking hands. Finally, through broken breaths and trembling lips, the little pup whispered the words that silenced an entire city. They hurt my mom." The marketplace seemed to freeze. Conversations vanished. Even the restless pigeons scattered into the sky without a sound. Kieran did not immediately ask who. He did not demand names or accuse anyone standing nearby. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the frightened child, noticing scraped sleeves, exhausted eyes that had cried for far too long, and the unmistakable look of someone who had run farther than little legs ever should. Compassion, not anger, settled across the Alpha King's face. Behind him, several city officials exchanged uneasy glances. A nobleman quietly adjusted his embroidered cuffs. A captain of the local guard suddenly found the cobblestones far more interesting than the king's expression. They all sensed the same invisible shift in the air. Something hidden had just stepped into the light. Kieran gently rested one hand on the boy's shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked. The child swallowed hard before finding enough courage to answer. "Noah." The Alpha King gave a single reassuring nod. "All right, Noah," he said softly. "Take me to your mother." Evelyn Carter never noticed the royal bells echoing across Blackstone City because all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Thick iron chains did not bind her wrists, but the circle of accusing faces surrounding her felt heavier than any metal ever could. She stood in the center of the town square with her faded blue dress dusted from the long mourning, her light brown hair loosened by the wind, and quiet green eyes fixed on the worn cobblestones beneath her feet. She refused to look toward the crowd that whispered her name as though kindness itself had somehow become suspicious. A wooden table displayed several bundles of rare moon herbs collected earlier that morning, their silver leaves glowing beneath the autumn sunlight. Lord Victor Holloway, the wealthiest merchant in the district, folded his embroidered coat neatly before speaking with practiced confidence. He claimed those precious herbs had disappeared from his private greenhouse only hours before they were discovered inside Evelyn's small basket. His words sounded polished. His expression remained calm. Everything about the accusation appeared convincing except for one simple truth. Evelyn had gathered her herbs from the public forest at sunrise, exactly as she had every week for nearly 6 years. She opened her mouth to explain, but another voice quickly interrupted. Witnesses insisted they had seen her leaving the merchant estate before dawn. Others nodded, even though they had seen nothing themselves. Rumors moved through the marketplace faster than facts ever could. Evelyn lowered her eyes again, not because she believed the accusations, but because arguing with frightened people rarely changed frightened minds. She had spent years quietly treating injured farm animals, comforting lonely elders, and preparing simple remedies for families who could not afford expensive healers. Most accepted her help in private. Very few defended her in public. One elderly woman squeezed a small cloth between trembling hands, clearly wanting to speak, yet fear kept her silent. A young stable worker recognized the familiar healer who had once saved his aging horse without asking for a single coin, but he looked toward Lord Holloway before lowering his head. Respect for power often drowned gratitude. Standing only a few yards away, Noah struggled against the firm grip of a city guard who kept insisting everything would be sorted out soon. The little boy's blue eyes never left his mother. Every time Evelyn managed the smallest reassuring smile, Noah tried once more to reach her. She answered each attempt with an almost invisible shake of her head, silently asking him to stay safe no matter what happened next. Then the guard looked away for only a heartbeat. That single moment was enough. Noah slipped free, darted through a narrow gap between startled spectators, and disappeared into the crowded streets before anyone realized where he was running. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. Her smile vanished for the first time that day. She whispered his name so softly that no one except the autumn breeze seemed to hear it. Minutes stretched into an eternity as officials continued discussing fines, records, and public order, never noticing that the only person who truly mattered had already fled. Now, as distant footsteps echoed across the square and unfamiliar silence slowly spread through the gathering, Evelyn finally lifted her eyes. The crowd was no longer watching her. Every face had turned toward the wide avenue leading into the marketplace. Whatever Noah had found beyond those streets had followed him back, and the expressions surrounding her shifted from certainty to uneasy anticipation before a single word was spoken. Alpha King Kieran Ashford walked beside Noah without haste, allowing the frightened little boy to keep holding his hand the entire way through the silent marketplace. The royal guards followed several steps behind, uncertain whether to clear the streets or simply observe. No one dared speak above a whisper. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the child leading the most powerful man in the kingdom, as though he alone now decided where justice would travel. When they reached the center of the square, Kieran immediately saw the woman standing alone inside the circle of officials. She looked exhausted rather than defeated. Dust clung to the hem of her faded blue dress, and loose strands of light brown hair framed a face that carried quiet dignity despite the suspicion surrounding her. She searched the crowd with growing worry until her eyes finally found Noah. Relief rushed across her features so suddenly that tears gathered before she could hide them. Noah broke into a run. Evelyn instinctively stepped forward, but 2 city officers moved between them, insisting that the hearing had not concluded. The little boy stopped only because Kieran gently rested one hand upon his shoulder. "Please," Noah whispered, his voice trembling. She did nothing wrong. The words echoed through the square with surprising clarity. Lord Victor Holloway folded his hands behind his back and offered the Alpha King a respectful bow. "Your Majesty, this unfortunate matter is already under control. The woman has been accused of taking property that does not belong to her. We are simply following the law." Kieran gave no immediate reply. His calm expression revealed nothing. Instead, he slowly surveyed every face surrounding Evelyn. Some appeared confident. Others suddenly avoided meeting his eyes. He noticed an elderly woman clutching a small cloth so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. A stable worker shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. Several merchants exchanged uncertain glances, as though each hoped someone else would speak first. Fear had settled over the square long before the king arrived. It had simply changed direction. Evelyn lowered her head respectfully. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "my son should not have interrupted your duties. I am sorry for troubling the crown. Kieran looked at her for a long moment. There was no bitterness in her voice. No desperate pleading. Only concern that her child had caused difficulty for someone else. That alone surprised him. Most innocent people fought to prove themselves. This woman worried first about her son. Noah reached toward his mother again, tears filling his blue eyes. Mama, I found him. I knew he would listen. Evelyn's composure nearly broke. She forced herself to smile through glistening eyes, hoping the familiar warmth would comfort the little boy even if she could not hold him. Kieran noticed that smile. It was gentle, reassuring, and entirely focused on the frightened child instead of her own circumstances. He had seen many people protect their reputation. Far fewer protected another heart before their own. The Alpha King finally turned toward the assembled officials. His voice remained even, but every syllable carried quiet authority. No judgment will be made until I hear every voice that has remained silent. The marketplace became so still that even the fluttering royal banners seemed to pause with the wind. Somewhere in the crowd, someone drew a slow, nervous breath. Then, from the very back of the gathering, a frail elderly woman lifted her trembling hand and took one cautious step forward. The elderly woman moved with careful steps, leaning heavily on a weathered wooden cane that clicked softly against the cobblestones with every pace. Murmurs rippled through the marketplace as people recognized Margaret Ellis, the oldest resident of Blackstone City, and someone who rarely spoke in public unless the truth demanded a voice. She stopped several feet from the Alpha King and bowed her head with quiet respect before lifting her tired eyes toward Evelyn. Tears shimmered there, not from fear, but from gratitude carried over many years. Your Majesty, she began, her voice gentle yet steady. If this woman is guilty of anything, then her greatest crime is helping people who could never repay her. The square fell silent once more. Margaret slowly reached into the worn pocket of her shawl and removed a small linen pouch tied with faded blue thread. 3 winters ago, when sickness spread through my home, I had nothing left to offer. No silver, no food, no family nearby. Miss Carter came every morning before sunrise. She brought herbs, warm broth, and hope. She never accepted a single coin. Several people lowered their heads. Others shifted uneasily as forgotten memories returned. Kieran listened without interrupting. His calm eyes remained fixed upon the elderly woman, while Noah quietly slipped closer to his mother, standing only a few feet away now. Evelyn looked overwhelmed, almost embarrassed by the praise, as though kindness had never been something worth mentioning. Before Margaret could step back, another voice rose from the edge of the gathering. A broad-shouldered stable master removed his cap and walked forward. Daniel Brooks cleared his throat before speaking. My old mare collapsed during harvest season last year. Every healer said she would never walk again. Miss Carter stayed beside that horse for 2 days. She saved her, and when I tried to pay, she told me to buy winter coats for my daughters instead. A young baker raised his hand next. She delivered medicine to my wife during the blizzard. Then a widow spoke. After her came the village schoolteacher. One after another, ordinary people stepped from the crowd carrying stories that had remained hidden behind ordinary days. None described miracles. They spoke instead of simple acts of compassion freely given without expectation of reward. The marketplace slowly transformed. What had begun as a gathering of accusation became a gathering of remembrance. Every testimony seemed to loosen another knot of silence that had held the crowd captive. Lord Victor Holloway forced a polite smile, but the confidence he had worn so comfortably only minutes earlier began to fade. His fingers repeatedly adjusted the silver ring upon his hand, and he glanced towards several officials as though hoping someone would restore control of the hearing. None stepped forward. They sensed the balance shifting beyond their influence. Kieran finally looked toward Evelyn herself. Miss Carter, he asked quietly, why did you never tell anyone these things? She seemed surprised by the question. After a thoughtful pause, she answered with the same calm honesty that had filled every word she had spoken that day. Because kindness loses something precious the moment it is performed for applause, Your Majesty. People needed help. That was reason enough. The answer lingered over the square like the first light after a long storm. Even the royal guards exchanged thoughtful glances. Kieran lowered his eyes briefly before looking once more across the gathered faces. He no longer saw a woman standing alone. He saw an entire city realizing how easily gratitude could be buried beneath fear. Then his attention settled upon Lord Holloway, whose composed expression faltered for the first time as the Alpha King spoke for quiet words that carried unmistakable authority. Now we examine evidence. Lord Victor Holloway straightened his coat and forced another courteous smile, but the confidence in his eyes no longer matched the calm expression on his face. The Alpha King's request had changed everything. This was no longer a simple hearing controlled by local officials. Every word spoken now carried the full weight of the crown. Kieran Ashford stepped toward the wooden table where the bundles of silver moon herbs had been carefully arranged. He examined them without touching a single leaf, his attention moving instead to the woven basket resting beside them. "Who found these?" he asked. A city officer stepped forward and bowed. "I did, Your Majesty. They were discovered inside Miss Carter's basket shortly after sunrise." Kieran nodded once before asking his next question. "Who remained with the basket from the moment it was found until now?" The officer hesitated. His eyes shifted briefly toward Lord Holloway before returning to the ground. "No one, Your Majesty." The square was crowded. There were several moments when people moved around the evidence. A faint murmur swept through the marketplace. Kieran remained perfectly composed. "Then no one can honestly claim that nothing was added or removed after it was first discovered." Silence answered him. The Alpha King slowly turned toward Evelyn. "Miss Carter, describe your morning exactly as you remember it." She took a slow breath. "I left my cottage before sunrise with Noah. We walked to the eastern forest where the public gathering grounds begin beyond Miller Creek. I collected common healing herbs for families who had placed requests earlier this week. Noah helped carry the smaller basket because he likes to learn the names of the plants." Noah immediately nodded. "Mama always lets me hold the lavender because she says I smile whenever I smell it." Gentle laughter quietly spread through the crowd, easing the tension for only a moment. Kieran knelt beside the little boy again. "Did anyone speak with your mother while you gathered herbs?" Noah thought carefully before answering. "A man on a brown horse watched us for a long time. Mama waved because she thought maybe he needed help, but he rode away." Several people exchanged curious glances. Kieran noticed Lord Holloway briefly tighten his jaw. The Alpha King rose and looked toward the merchant. "Did you leave your estate this morning?" "Only after my workers reported the missing herbs." Holloway answered smoothly. "Then perhaps your stable records will confirm the exact time." Holloway's polite smile faded almost imperceptibly. Before he could answer, a young apprentice from the merchant district slowly stepped out of the crowd, nervously twisting his cap between both hands. He could not have been older than 16. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, I think I should tell you something." Every eye turned toward him. The boy swallowed hard before continuing. "At dawn I delivered flour to Lord Holloway's kitchens. I saw one of his servants carrying baskets toward the market long before anyone announced the herbs were missing. I thought they were preparing for today's trading stalls." Lord Holloway immediately interrupted. "The child is mistaken." But the apprentice shook his head. "I remember because the servant accidentally dropped one bundle near the fountain, and I helped pick it up." The marketplace grew still once again. One simple memory had created a crack in a story that moments earlier had appeared flawless. Kieran looked neither surprised nor satisfied. His steady gaze rested upon Holloway with quiet patience, as though inviting the truth to reveal itself without force. Somewhere behind the gathered crowd, another unfamiliar voice suddenly called out, "Your Majesty, I was that servant, and there is something you deserve to know." The servant slowly emerged from the crowd with his shoulders lowered and his hands trembling so badly that he nearly dropped the cloth cap he carried. His name was Thomas Reed, a quiet, stable hand known by many in Blackstone City, but rarely noticed. He stopped several feet before the Alpha King, unable to look directly into the ruler's silver eyes. The silence surrounding him felt heavier than the autumn air itself. Kieran spoke first, his voice steady and calm. "Take your time. No one here will interrupt you." Thomas drew a deep breath before finally lifting his head. "Your Majesty, everything the apprentice said is true. I carried the herb baskets from Lord Holloway's greenhouse before sunrise. He told me they were gifts for an important customer in the marketplace." A ripple of surprise spread through the gathering. Thomas continued before fear could steal his courage. "When we reached the square, he ordered me to leave one basket beside the fountain and return to the estate immediately. I obeyed because I believed it was honest work. I did not understand why until people began accusing Miss Carter later that morning. Lord Victor Holloway stepped forward at once, forcing a measured smile that no longer reached his eyes. The servant is confused. He has worked long hours this week. Thomas slowly shook his head. I remember because Miss Carter smiled at me while she passed through the market with her son. She even thanked me for helping an elderly man cross the street. She had no basket near the fountain when I first saw her. The marketplace fell silent again. Several merchants quietly exchanged uneasy glances, recalling pieces of the morning that suddenly fit together in an entirely different way. Kieran observed every expression without speaking. He had learned long ago that truth often revealed itself not only through words, but through the faces of those listening. Evelyn stood motionless, her eyes filling with quiet emotion. She had spent hours preparing herself to endure judgment, yet she had never expected strangers to risk their own comfort for her sake. Noah reached for her hand at last, and this time no officer stepped between them. His small fingers wrapped around hers with complete trust. She squeezed them gently, grateful beyond words. Then another unexpected voice rose from the edge of the square. Daniel Brooks, the stable master who had spoken earlier, removed a neatly folded receipt from his coat pocket. Your Majesty, I almost forgot this. He walked forward and handed the paper to one of the royal guards, who immediately delivered it to the Alpha King. Daniel pointed toward the handwritten date. Yesterday afternoon, Miss Carter purchased common healing herbs from my cousin's farm because the Eastern Gathering Grounds had produced a poor harvest this season. She paid honestly. She had no reason to steal anything. Kieran examined the receipt carefully before handing it to the chief royal clerk for verification. The ink, seal, and signature all matched official records. Another piece of the accusation quietly collapsed. Lord Holloway's confident posture finally began to fade. Tiny beads of perspiration appeared along his forehead despite the cool afternoon breeze. He looked around the square as though searching for someone willing to support his version of events, but every familiar face now seemed uncertain. The Alpha King folded his hands behind his back and allowed the growing silence to settle over everyone present. Interesting, he said softly. The evidence continues to move in only one direction, and it is no longer pointing toward Miss Carter. The marketplace remained perfectly still as the chief royal clerk finished examining the receipt for a second time before bowing respectfully toward the Alpha King. Your Majesty, the document is authentic. The seal belongs to the Brooks family farm, and the payment was recorded yesterday afternoon exactly as stated. A quiet wave of disbelief spread through the crowd. What had begun as certainty had unraveled into undeniable doubt. Lord Victor Holloway opened his mouth to object, but no words came. Every explanation he had prepared seemed smaller than the growing weight of the truth standing before him. Kieran Ashford took one slow step forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not display anger. Yet the entire square instinctively fell silent. Even the fluttering banners above seemed to surrender to the stillness surrounding the king. Justice, Kieran said calmly, cannot belong only to those with influence. It belongs first to those who have no power to defend themselves. His words settled over the marketplace with quiet authority. The city officers who had surrounded Evelyn moments earlier slowly lowered their eyes. One by one, they stepped back, creating a clear path between her and Noah. The little boy ran into his mother's arms at last, wrapping both arms around her waist while she knelt to hold him close. She closed her eyes for only a moment, breathing in the simple comfort of knowing he was safe. Kieran watched the reunion without interrupting it. Then he turned toward Lord Holloway. You accused an innocent citizen before verifying the facts. You relied upon fear instead of evidence and expected this city to mistake confidence for truth. Holloway quickly bowed. Your Majesty, there must be some misunderstanding. I acted only to protect honest trade. Kieran met his eyes with unwavering calm. Honest trade requires honest conduct. The merchant lowered his gaze, unable to answer. The Alpha King looked instead toward the gathered citizens. How many remained silent today because they feared speaking against wealth or position? No one answered immediately. Then Margaret Ellis slowly raised her hand. Daniel Brooks followed. The young apprentice did the same. Within moments, dozens of hands quietly rose throughout the marketplace. Some belonged to merchants. Others belonged to laborers, widows, teachers, and craftsmen. Kieran studied them with quiet sadness rather than satisfaction. Fear is understandable, he said. But when fear becomes stronger than truth, every innocent person stands alone. His words reached far beyond Evelyn. Many people lowered their heads, realizing they had witnessed her kindness for years while allowing suspicion to erase it within a single morning. Kieran faced Evelyn once more. "Miss Carter, on behalf of the Crown, your name is fully cleared of every accusation presented here today." A collective breath escaped the crowd. Several people who had remained distant now stepped forward, offering quiet apologies with lowered eyes. Evelyn accepted each one with the same gentle grace that had defined her from the beginning. She did not ask for recognition. She did not demand repayment. She simply nodded, grateful that truth had finally found its voice. Noah looked up at the Alpha King with wide blue eyes. "Does that mean my mama can go home?" A faint smile touched Kieran's face. "Yes," he answered softly, "and no one in this kingdom will question her honor again without proof." As those words echoed across the square, sunlight caught something hanging beneath the collar of Evelyn's dress. A small silver pendant slipped into view, its ancient design glimmering for only an instant. The moment Kieran saw the unfamiliar crest, his calm expression changed ever so slightly, as though an old memory had suddenly awakened. The silver pendant rested against Evelyn's dress as though it had always belonged there. Yet the instant sunlight touched its surface, Alpha King Kieran Ashford felt a quiet recognition he could not explain. The delicate emblem engraved into the worn metal was nearly faded by time, but its shape remained unmistakable. A crescent moon embraced by the branches of an ancient ash tree. He had seen that symbol only once before, preserved inside the oldest royal archives where forgotten bloodlines and vanished alliances were recorded by hand centuries earlier. His gaze lingered upon the pendant for only a moment before he returned his attention to Evelyn, careful not to reveal the questions now forming in his mind. "Miss Carter," he asked gently, "may I ask where you received that necklace?" Evelyn instinctively touched the pendant with her fingertips. A faint smile crossed her face, softer than any she had shown throughout the long afternoon. "It belonged to my mother, Your Majesty. She told me never to sell it, no matter how difficult life became. She said it carried the memory of our family, even if we no longer understood its story." Noah looked up proudly. "Mama says Grandma wore it every day too." Kieran gave a thoughtful nod. "Do you know where your family lived before Blackstone City?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. "Very little. My mother rarely spoke about the past. She believed that a person's character mattered more than their name. After she passed away, all that remained was this pendant and the lessons she taught me." Those simple words stirred something unexpected inside the Alpha King. Throughout his years upon the throne, he had met nobles who treasured ancient titles more than honorable actions. Yet this woman possessed neither wealth nor influence, and still she carried herself with a quiet dignity that could not be purchased. Royal Archivist Benjamin Hale, who had accompanied the procession in silence, stepped closer after noticing where the king's attention rested. He studied the pendant from a respectful distance before speaking carefully. "Your Majesty, if I am not mistaken, that design resembles one of the oldest family crests recorded before the Great Unification. I believed every branch connected to that house had disappeared generations ago." Evelyn looked between the two men with visible confusion. "I am afraid I do not understand." Kieran offered a reassuring expression. "Neither do I. Not completely." He paused before continuing. "Sometimes history hides itself within ordinary lives until the right moment arrives." The words settled gently between them. He asked no further questions because instinct told him that today was meant for restoring justice, not uncovering every mystery at once. Around them, the mood of the marketplace had transformed completely. People who had once whispered accusations now greeted Evelyn with quiet respect. Several families approached to thank her again for years of kindness they had too often taken for granted. Children smiled at Noah, inviting him to join them near the fountain where fear had only hours earlier overshadowed laughter. Watching his son-like joy return, Evelyn's eyes filled with grateful tears. Kieran observed the scene in thoughtful silence. He realized that the strongest measure of a kingdom was not its castles or armies, but whether ordinary people felt safe enough to remain compassionate. As he prepared to leave, a cool breeze swept across the square, lifting the edge of Evelyn's cloak. The silver pendant caught the light once more, and for the briefest instant Kieran felt an unfamiliar warmth echo deep within his wolf, quiet, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. The royal procession remained in the marketplace long after the formal hearing had ended, because no one seemed ready to leave the place where justice had quietly changed so many hearts. Noah laughed for the first time that day as several neighborhood children invited him to chase one another around the old stone fountain, his bright smile replacing every trace of fear that had shadowed his young face only hours before. Evelyn watched him with grateful eyes, her shoulders finally relaxing as though she had been carrying an invisible burden for far too long. The afternoon sunlight painted the city in warm shades of gold, and for the first time since dawn, Blackstone felt less like a place divided by suspicion and more like a community remembering who it had always hoped to become. Kieran Ashford stood in thoughtful silence, observing the simple scene unfolding before him. Kings often witnessed grand ceremonies, military victories, and celebrations that filled entire kingdoms. Yet somehow the sight of one little family rediscovering peace carried a different kind of weight. It reminded him that the purpose of power was never to inspire fear. It was to make ordinary people feel safe enough to live with kindness. Before returning to his horse, he removed the heavy silver cloak fastened across his shoulders. The finely woven fabric carried the royal crest embroidered in white thread, a symbol recognized throughout every territory under his protection. Without ceremony or hesitation, he stepped toward Evelyn and gently placed the cloak around her shoulders. A quiet gasp moved through the crowd. Such an honor was almost never given outside the royal court. Evelyn instinctively reached to remove it, but Kieran offered a calm shake of his head. "Please keep it," he said softly. "Today it belongs exactly where it should." Her eyes widened with surprise. "Your Majesty, I have done nothing to deserve such kindness." His answer came without the slightest pause. "You have spent years giving kindness without asking whether anyone deserved it first." Those words settled over the square more deeply than any proclamation. Several people lowered their heads, recognizing the truth they had overlooked for far too long. Margaret Ellis smiled through grateful tears. Daniel Brooks quietly placed a reassuring hand upon Thomas Reed's shoulder. Even the city officers seemed changed, understanding that compassion required as much courage as enforcing the law. Noah hurried back toward his mother and looked up at the oversized royal cloak draped around her shoulders. "Mama," he whispered with complete wonder, "you look like a queen." Laughter, warm and genuine, rippled through the marketplace. Evelyn knelt beside her son and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "No, sweetheart," she said with a tender smile. "I am happiest simply being your mother." Kieran watched them together, and once again the quiet warmth stirred deep within his wolf, stronger now than before, carrying the unmistakable feeling that this meeting had not been an accident, but the beginning of a path neither of them yet understood. He offered Evelyn one final respectful nod before mounting his horse. As the royal procession slowly departed through the western gate, countless citizens bowed, not because tradition demanded it, but because gratitude had replaced fear inside their hearts. Evelyn stood beneath the autumn sky with Noah's small hand safely resting inside her own, the royal cloak wrapped gently around her shoulders, and the ancient silver pendant resting close to her heart. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, and neither did the Alpha King, but somewhere beyond the quiet streets of Blackstone City, destiny had already begun writing the next chapter of a story that started not with power, but with the tears of a child and the courage to listen.